let's talk epoxy, specifically surfboard epoxy. In this video series, we're making a surfboard out of EPS foam, aka styrofoam. You cannot use fiberglass resin or polyester resin to do the lamination because it will eat right through the foam. So do not use that type of resin. You have to use epoxy resin. Now, epoxy has its own sets of, I won't say challenges, but it can be finicky to work with. Number one, you have to have a good working temperature, above 15 degrees Celsius. Right now it's cold out in the garage, and like this epoxy does not flow. This resin does not want to flow at all. And also the temperature affects how well it cures and at the rate that it cures. Now, it will cure eventually at a colder temperature, but it's not really nice to work with. You won't be able to spread it out on your lamination or on your hot coat. It just doesn't flow as well. And when we're epoxying the board, you want a few days of good, solid, consistent temperatures above 15 degrees Celsius. So it's going to be a while yet because it's still kind of cold here before you can get good results. So I've used a few different types of epoxies. I like Resin Research. I've used West System. I've used Surfsource. Didn't have great luck with Surfsource, unfortunately. I used that about 5 years ago, and the board came out kind of yellow. The epoxy was a little off. I don't know. I didn't really like it. I like Resin Research. It's nice and clear. I have a board up here made from Resin Research about 3 years ago. Still white. Still see, at least you can see the foam, and it's white. It's given me really great results. Now, to talk about using the epoxy itself, again, temperature, humidity. You want a low humidity. You want a good, nice, warm temperature, above 15 degrees Celsius. You can warm your epoxy to make it flow better, but do not, and that also, warming your epoxy affects how quick it cures as well. But do not, whatever you do, thin your epoxy with lacquer thinner or acetone. You can use an additive called Additive F. It's essentially a xylene, I believe. This stuff is really great for epoxy. It helps wetting out when you're doing lamination. It's great for doing the hot coat. It prevents or helps prevent fish eyes, and it's a surfacing agent. It's just really, really great. I definitely has changed the way I made boards since I started using this stuff. Now, you can see in this Additive F, it's a little kind of chunky because there's some, I think, wax in it. You just need to get this back up nice and warm, and it'll dissolve back in. So, again, temperature, not your cold temperature is not your friend when working with epoxy. So, number one, temperature needs to be above 15 degrees. Number two, that I also recommend for working with epoxy is using a scale. You can measure out epoxy using cups and measuring pumps, but nothing works as well as using a digital scale. You can measure small amounts, big amounts, and you can get consistent, accurate results consistently all the time. This was only like a $10 scale. For the grand scheme of things, for working on a surfboard, that is a small price to pay. Highly recommend picking one up. Some other pointers. You don't want to get this stuff on your skin, so make sure you wear some gloves, nitrile gloves, disposable gloves, just cheap vinyl gloves even. That way you can, when you're done, you can toss them out. Mixing containers. I use yogurt containers depending on the volume, or I use an ice cream container. When I'm done, I let it harden, I just toss it out. It's nice and easy and cheap. And again, because I'm using those, they don't have markings on them. It's really easy to measure out your epoxy on the scale. This particular type of epoxy is a 2-part resin, 1-part hardener for Resin Research. Works great. I've had no problems with this stuff. It's strong, it cures well. Just overall a nice epoxy. It's pricey. Epoxy is a lot more expensive than polyester resin, but you know, you got to do what you got to do. So it works. I think that's about it for epoxy. I don't know. I'll talk about it a bit more when I actually do the glassing. When I come across anything that you guys might need to know. But for now, that's epoxy.